Hi there. My name's Rob MacDonald. I work as a psychologist in our community, and myself and a few volunteers here at our church have gotten together to produce some resources for managing the mental health aspects of going through a pandemic. We've been developing a few short videos on how to cultivate healthy emotional, mental, and behavioral practices in the midst of an extremely challenging situation. And as this crisis has evolved, as a people, we've had to adapt to significant collective changes that have happened with astonishing speed. And the amount of stress that has generated on all of us is significant. And so now that we've been dealing with this crisis for well over a month now in our community anyway, are you noticing that you're having headaches, a tight neck, tight shoulders? Do you feel anxious, irritable, frustrated at home or at work, or with having to do your work with home, or with not having work at all anymore? Do you use caffeine and other habits to cope with everyday demands? And are you lashing out at others, or conversely withdrawing from your life? Learning to recognize and manage stress is going to become an essential skill as we continue to face the various threats that will continue to come at us. And so I wanted to share a couple of things with us today. Now, as I mentioned in our first video, stress is a natural function that alerts us to danger and threat and primes us to respond well. Now, stress can be helpful by motivating us to prepare, to organize, to reallocate resources, and help us determine essential functions from non-essential. But it's meant to be short-term. This is essential at the onset of a crisis, but after a while it needs to be well managed, as it can get destructive for us. So stress can play a crucial role in our life. And stress is related to particular situations and problems, and in this sense, it's quite helpful. Now, it's quite likely that you have big decisions to make, or you've had big decisions to make, or big problems to solve as a result of the entire world coming to a standstill, and the fact that you now have to consider all your daily actions carefully through the lens of potential infection or possibly passing infection on to someone else. There's a lot of big problems to solve. And this heightened sense of awareness and pressure that you feel, we would call that stress. And if it's in a helpful mid-range, not too low and not too high, it'll serve its purpose well for you. But stress can also become unhealthy when it's chronic or too intense in the moment. Chronic stress occurs when our mental and physical systems remain on high alert to respond to situations that never seem to end. There's a reason why roller coaster rides, for example, are only a few minutes long and not a few days. A healthy amount of stress can can happen in the context of adjusting to the realities of a pandemic, but chronic stress will set in with the more long-lasting effects, as the potential for economic collapse, being socially isolated for long periods of time, trying to avoid contracting a virus, ongoing death counts that make us terrified that any one of us could be next, or being stuck in an already dysfunctional, abusive home environment that's likely only being made worse by these circumstances. So chronic stress has been well researched, and it's well established that it's directly linked to all manner of difficulties for us. One, it's bad for your heart, as that constant demand for increased blood flow creates plaque on arteries. It's bad for your brain, as those cells that don't actually die have less little branches attached to them to connect to other neurons, and in fact, certain brain structures that marinate in stress hormones can be damaged, which impairs learning and memory centers, affecting our ability to remember things or learn new things or concentrate, and is bad for developing brains as well. And it's bad for your mood. These can be demonstrated in some PET scans. In one study I was watching, where a PET scan in monkeys, where you have the dominant, less stress individuals showing a more dopamine release, and a dopamine is a bit of you could in some ways call it a feel-good neurotransmitter, but it causes pleasure. And in chronically stressed individuals, much less dopamine is released, making life for them duller, more miserable, less adaptive to negative circumstances. So it's bad for our moods as well. There's a couple of unhealthy ways of dealing with stress. One, attempts at escape. Rather than dealing with the actual stressor, trying to escape it is quite common. And we do this in a variety of ways. Overeating, alcohol, substance abuse, playing endlessly on our phones, displacing anger or engaging in denial or defensiveness, or these are all signs of avoidance. Basically, it's any activity that on its own is not necessarily problematic, but when it starts to be used for that purpose other than directed, it's helpful to consider what you're trying to relieve by engaging in that activity. An unhealthy way of dealing with stress is withdrawal. Now, this is a common one as well, where you check out mentally from a stressful situation. And then the third one, an unhealthy way of dealing with stress, relates to aggression or irritability, which is pretty common, where we lash out at others from that place of feeling powerlessness or a despair. There's a couple more adaptive, healthy ways, though, to manage stress. And here you have the image of a bucket. Now, in that bucket, there's always a continual inflow of circumstances, situations, all kinds of things that keep flowing into our bucket. And then the level inside of it fluctuates. And too much input, and the water spills over, or the whole bucket falls over. But if you can kind of keep things in that bottom 1/3 of the bucket, if it's only that full, that's pretty manageable. It's enough to help meet challenges. You get some pleasurable excitement in there too from other things. Stress is related to that as well. And then if you get enough input, your bucket starts to fill up. It goes past that middle third. Acute stress events, this is what those are. They're manageable when done well, but they tend to dissipate. So we've got enough in there to sort of manage that. And then in the top third, you got something more related to this chronic stress that keeps the bucket near capacity at all times. And that's not a good place to be, because you don't have capacity to absorb new situations, new stressors, and new changes. And there's only a couple options you can do to lower those water levels, and one is maybe kick it over. Two would be to let it overflow, which isn't actually lessening any volume. And three, install a tap on the bottom and open it. And so I'm advocating for installing a tap on the bottom to get those levels down where you want them to be so they're more manageable. And so as we go through this multifaceted approach to learning about and managing stress, I'm going to highlight a few areas where we can open the tap at the bottom of the bucket and let some of the stress out. So I'm going to highlight 5 domains for us where stress is generated and maintained, but also where it's adjusted or quote-unquote treated. The first would be the physical level. Now, on a biological level, stress is a combination of hormones secreted when we need it in order to perform well or survive in the face of an actual or perceived threat. And on a really basic level, stress is what keeps us alive a good deal of the time. We start talking about that fight or flight mechanism that in response to threats. And when engaged, the body does some amazing things automatically and incredibly fast. So through a complex process of your brain setting off alarm signals and then nerve and hormone stimulation, the adrenal glands releasing cortisol, epinephrine into the bloodstream, that's what we call the stress response. And as a result, the body's glucose levels increase, heart and respiration rates go up, thereby increasing energy. And this process is meant to increase your energy and also to consolidate it. So pupils dilated. You might start to sweat, get dry mouth. Your blood pressure increases and so does your heart rate. And at the same time, other functions get put on hold, like stomach functions or tissue repair. So your awareness is heightened. Your breathing accelerates. Your glucose rates go up, all to raise energy to be able to fight yourself out of a situation or run from it. And so in an acute stress situation where survival is paramount, that's all incredibly helpful. This is what gets you out of bed at night when you hear a noise or smell smoke. You react to avoid a car crash, or you manage to avoid or deal with any kind of traumatic situation. Now, our bodies are created with this ability to respond to threats like that pretty much instantly, but they're not created to remain at those levels for weeks, months, years on end. And so every time now in this situation where we hear about the death count in this country or that, or you hear projections of how long this is going on, or going to go on, or you hear about how the economy is going to be laid to waste, the stress response in us is activated. And the kind of stress we face now has to do with how long will all this continue with this delayed resolution. When will things return to normal? Will we be able to enjoy a summer as normal? Will I have a job? Where are we going to get income? Food? How much longer do we have to remain at home and not gather in groups as we normally would? So all of these stressors keep us in a state of chronic stress that actually isn't good for our health or our relationships or our productivity. The chronic stress has been confirmed to lower your resistance to disease, generate fatigue, and put you at greater risk for depression. So there's, with all of these, with all 5 of these things that I'm going to mention, I got a little bit of some comments about it, and then some ideas for stress management about it. So stress management regarding the physical. Step 1, good physical caring for the self. And this includes good sleep, or at least creating the opportunities for good sleep. Good nutritional intake, and of course, exercise. The stuff that we always recommend, but a lot of times we just don't do. The lack of sleep, an increase in caffeine or alcohol use can all serve to increase your cortisol levels, and if done for long periods can lead to being immunocompromised or even cognitive impairments like your memory's not as sharp. And so moderating some of those things is extremely important. Relaxation exercises are essential. We've got a list of these in the handout or in the resources page, and so I'd encourage you to check those out. But they include breathing exercises, muscle relaxation. Next, environmental. We want to find those places where we're able to let go of stress, maybe let go of and unplug from our screens, and just find a place that's calming and soothing, and there's no demands on us at that particular moment, but we're not taking anything in either. We're just at peace. And lastly, we want to take time to slow down the body, learning how to breathe well, how to release tension out of your muscles, trying to find calming. All this stuff is essential, but it takes a bit of focus and it takes a bit of intention. The second one that I want to talk about is the psychological. Now, on the psychological level, stress is experienced in our own thoughts and emotions. I'm going to focus mainly on thinking. What we think about can either lessen or exacerbate stress. And our feelings can either lessen or exacerbate our experience of stress as well. So how we evaluate and make meaning of situations makes a difference in how we feel about it and how much stress we end up taking on. Our interpretations can cause all kinds of misunderstandings, conflict with others, and stress on ourselves. So it's important to be able to isolate what we're thinking, what we're telling ourselves, in order to sort of see what kind of interpretations we're using and whether those are helpful or not. Now, as humans, we have this incredible ability to change our thoughts and our perceptions, to assign meaning that's more adaptive, more helpful. And the hard work comes when we take time to choose and have a different perspective and a different attitude. So what are some stress management things when it comes to the psychological? Well, 1, learning to become aware of our thinking and how it affects our stress levels is important. It's one of those aspects of our lives that we have some control, we have some say, we have some agency over it, which gives us a little bit of hope. And so 1 would be to practice mindfulness. And by that I mean even taking and becoming aware of a thought in our mind where we notice it, we accept it, and with a breath we let it go. So for example, this might occur to you one day. Or maybe it already has. A thought that goes like this: there's likely no toilet paper or disinfectant wipes in the store. I don't know if anybody's had that thought in the last month or so. But at its essence, at its core, it is just a thought. It doesn't actually mean anything. So what would the process for dealing with that thought be? We would notice it. We would say, okay, I had that thought. We would let it be there. It's okay to think that. Of course we would think that in this kind of environment. And then 3, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to just let that thought go. Because here's the reasons. Maybe we are all stocked up already, or maybe we're not, but I will deal with that when that time comes. What we're trying to do is non-judgmentally become aware of that thinking in the moment and let it be. So here's a couple of examples of unhelpful thinking. These are thoughts that might occur to you. These are thoughts that occur to, pretty naturally occur to all of us. So an example of an unhealthy thought: my job was all I had. Or there is nothing our governments can do to protect us. Or I can't cope with this. My life will be over if this continues. I'd rather starve than go to a grocery store. I don't care if I get sick, so I'll be careless in public. Or that person over there is intentionally trying to get us all sick. Those are all unhelpful thoughts that are okay to notice and have a look at and then decide what we're going to do with them. And I'm suggesting we let them go. Here's an example of some more helpful thinking. And you can adjust some of these other ones and bring them into a more helpful line. But these are some examples of helpful thinking. I am more than just my job. I am resilient. We can manage whatever happens. I can find something to be grateful for. I have faith that God is with me. Or I can learn to manage stress. Or even if we lose everything, we'll still have X, Y, Z. Those are a couple of just quick examples of how thinking can be unhelpful and cause you more distress, or helpful and actually drive you towards a sense of a little more peace. The third one is social. Now, our social aspects here have been severely affected by all this. Our physical distancing and social isolation in this current context only intensifies social stress already experienced by those who face struggles at home with abuse or finances or access to resources. Consider what it would be like to not have internet access or data on your phone in a day like this. It's very, very difficult. So these factors contribute to higher overall stress levels, of course, and stress hormones being secreted, and they increase the risk of illness and disease. Our current economic conditions and stress about how to put food on the table while staying safe from infection will hit and affect marginalized people first and hardest and longest. So it's important to remain cognizant of how others are faring during this crisis. We need to practice compassion and caring now more than ever. And our social networks, though, are key to how we handle stress. There's much research to indicate that caring, compassionate social interaction is effective in reducing stress levels. The new reality of social isolation and physical distancing is going to force us to take greater care and initiative in this area to not only relieve the tensions already present, but to alleviate the stress that isolation itself will compound. So here's a couple of stress management ideas here related to the social component. Now, Basil van der Kolk said in a webinar I watched recently a few things related to social connection in this era of physical distancing that I really liked. I wanted to share them with you. He says, we need interactions with other minds, and there is comfort in being seen. When we share and when we engage with somebody else, there is relief and comfort in doing so. Our primary means, he says, of regulating ourselves are through our voices and through our faces. Hearing what we have to say and seeing the expressions of sadness, happiness, and whatever on each other is crucial to regulating ourselves. And this is really important. We don't just engage socially for no reason. We do this because it regulates ourselves. Now, our social connections have been disrupted, and in this era, we need to get creative to keep those connections going, to create healthy networks where maybe there weren't even any before. In our relationships, we need to learn positive ways to communicate and navigate conflict, but also to get back into doing some of the basics with each other if you're lucky enough to have another with you. Playing games, making music together, sharing stories, these kinds of things. Now, Basil van der Kolk also highlights the need for privacy as well. You might be confined to a small space with a lot of people. So making arrangements such as when I'm in this chair or in this room, that's me retreating and I need to be protected from talking and being asked to do things. We all need our space to do our own thing once in a while, and it creates safety in a home when that's respected. And lastly, be aware that children especially might be seeking additional attachment activity or connection to their caregivers. And be willing to offer them a little more talk time, cuddle time, activity time. Because these requests for attachments can come out in various ways, but sometimes in negative behaviors and varying levels of demand. And they need to be met with compassion and understanding rather than irritation or even abuse. So just be mindful of that. Now, the fourth one relates to our behavioral realm. Now, in addition to what we do with our bodies, in addition to how we think and feel, in addition to how we stay connected, what we do is important. We can adjust behavior, and the key is being aware of it and making conscious, intentional decisions about it. So how we choose to spend our time is essential. We can scroll endlessly, we can lay around, we can watch Netflix well into the wee hours of the morning. But stress increases the risk of us engaging in unhealthy behavior, such as losing your temper, getting angry, taking out your stress on others in inappropriate ways. So what are kind of some stress management ideas in the behavioral realm? Now, our bodies get activated when doing things. So we need to harness that energy positively into doing things like projects, activities, taking care of things, making plans, creating predictability for ourselves and our families. Predictability has been one of the major things that we've lost of late. And we need to create some of that even in this new sort of context. So take on projects, however small or insignificant. It gives a sense of accomplishment. Maybe learn something new. Learn how to cook or do laundry and teach the kids, bring them along in on it. Maybe get grandma to send a video into how to do something and then learn how to do it like that. Keep as much routine as possible. So in this context, creating a school time, a leisure time, family meals, bedtimes, game time, activities, all of that, even spiritual activity, where we keep some of these things in place and keep them constant in our life, and not just letting everything just kind of develop as it will. We want to, especially as adults, we want to model healthy coping of stress. And one way to do that is to be honest about your own feelings, but also in how you're going to cope with them and what you're doing to manage those. And lastly, especially with the behavioral, get enough facts and information about the virus, about how your community, province, country, and the world is managing it. But we have to limit that access, and probably most of you have noticed that, where you bring in too much, it's overwhelming, and it gets to you. So we want to take care to not be oversaturated with news, not be oversaturated with conspiracy theories and rants and blame at who's at fault and all those types of things. So just be careful with that. You need enough. And 5, spiritual. Now, finally, on a spiritual level, you experience stress in the form of sometimes confusion about God, lack of meaning and purpose, lack of connection or experience of transcendence. It's quite unsettling to not know what you're about or where you're headed, and if any of it even matters. Many people today are facing this now. We have lost a sense of who we are, what our purpose is, and how you're to fill your usual roles as maybe providers or helpers or whatever, and then how your faith relates to that all. But stress is also alleviated through the spiritual, the experience of one's faith, by having a sense of purpose and meaning and direction in life, and by having tangible connection with others that you share some of that with. So what are some stress management issues or ideas in the spiritual realm? Well, 1, engage in all the regular spiritual disciplines that you would have at your disposal, such as prayer, worship, meditation, community with others, service, reading of scriptures, etc. It's important that you continue with those activities and those practices in a time of stress. And if you never have, maybe today and now would be a good time to start searching for answers and comfort, and maybe spend time contemplating some of these big questions around meaning, purpose, the role of suffering, that type of thing. Maybe Maybe your sense of belonging in the world, your identity has been fundamentally altered doing this or during this, and you're not sure of where you fit anymore. So instead of turning to despair and hopelessness, I hope you engage some of these issues with a renewed sense of how you can grow, change, and adapt and create a new sense of meaning and connection with ultimate things. Even churches at this time have been dispersed, but there's just a wealth of online resources now available in form of video, live streams you can easily access. So I'd encourage you to try that as well, or look into it. Now, I hope this little overview of the impacts of stress and some basic techniques for managing it have been helpful for you. I've got a couple more videos coming up in the next little while focused on anxiety, grief and anger and depression. So I welcome you to join in on those too. So thanks for listening.